All right, heading into the home stretch of the NFL season. Excited to talk to our good friend Aaron Schtaz from Football Outsiders. You can check him and the fine folks over there doing great work. We told you about the almanac going into the season, the Bible. For those of you that want to get smarter about football, you can still check out footballoutsiders.com and get yourself smart as we get ready for the postseason. Aaron, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well, with an asterisk, right? Obviously, this has been a very strange week to cover the NFL. We've had other things on our minds other than just the games for next week and who's going to make the playoffs. Other than that, everything in my life is going well. But obviously, it's a strange week.
Yeah, it's a very difficult week for everyone trying to figure out, coming off of Monday Night Football, when and how do we start talking about a weekend of games that are going to happen. And, Aaron, factoring in a postseason that is absolutely going to involve both teams that were unfortunately in the Monday Night Football game where we saw what happened with Damar Hamlin. So very difficult to try and pick up the pieces and look forward towards this, but we will try and do just that. And I'm sure for you guys trying to factor all of this in and how you go about gauging what happens in Week 18 and beyond becomes increasingly difficult with that as well.
Yeah, I think the closest thing to this must be what it was like to cover baseball after the World Series earthquake in 1989. Because obviously, after the earthquake, the number one thing on everyone's mind was the tragedy, the deaths, collapsing highways, all that stuff was the number one thing on everyone's mind. But you had the knowledge that eventually you had to get to the rest of the World Series. So if you wrote about baseball for a living, you had to write about when was the World Series going to happen. It's just, it took, you had other stuff on your mind. And I think the same goes for this. We know there's going to be a Week 18. We know there's going to be a playoffs. We need to talk about that because that's what we do for a living. But obviously, the Hamlin situation is foremost in our minds right now.
It is, and I think you saw a lot of the sensitivity to that and the immediacy after, where some people were looking to maybe talk about the football portion of this and the ramifications far too quickly, as now we're still waiting for the good news on the other side of this, that Damar Hamlin is going to be okay. We're all still praying and hoping for that. But as we get further and further away from the immediacy, I think as people start to gently approach what's coming next, and I've seen a lot of sincerity in that. I've seen a lot of people acknowledging the important thing before very delicately and very separately talking about what's going on this upcoming weekend and beyond. So we'll try and do the same here as we talk about this upcoming weekend, fully acknowledging that for a lot of the players involved, we've heard from a number of coaches as well during their media availability that this week that people's minds are going to be elsewhere. But Aaron, let's look at Week 18 and how it sets up for the postseason. I kind of want to start off at the top and work our way back a bit. As we look at the playoff field, so much of which is set at this point for you guys. And for anyone unfamiliar, DVOA is the metric that you guys use in the ranking system there, breaks down every single play, compares teams' performances on a league average based on the situation, and determines that value over average. Am I explaining that well enough to do DVOA justice?
Adjusted for situation and opponent. Yep.
So it really an incredible efficiency metric here. As you look at the way that you guys rank all this, is there an upper crust that we have right now at the top among Super Bowl contenders where there's a group of teams and then a severe drop-off to who comes after that?
Yeah, I think everybody has the same upper crust. Our upper crust just looks slightly different, right? There's 6 teams that are this year's Big Six. Buffalo and Cincinnati and Kansas City in the AFC. Philadelphia, San Francisco, Dallas in the NFC. Now, our numbers would say if Lamar Jackson is healthy, the Baltimore Ravens belong in that group. They were in that group before Jackson got hurt. Their defense has actually played better in recent weeks than it did early in the season. Their special teams are still number 2 in the league. But if Jackson is not 100% healthy or Jackson is not playing at all, they don't belong in that group.
Yeah, and God, that's been the factor and the variable that's hardest to predict. And right now, I think in a lot of ways, we're sitting around for a lot of these games, reading injury reports, finding out who's going on IR and how it's going to affect that. I do want to stick in the AFC North for a second because you mentioned the Bengals in that grouping. We've seen another one of these late back half of the season surges where this team has started to put together. How does this year's Bengals team compare to last year's Bengals team that made the Super Bowl run?
I mean, they're better. By our numbers, they're just a lot better, right? Last year, we actually had the Bengals, by our numbers, as pretty much an average team. Some things fell right for them, so they went 10-7 and they won their division. And then they went on a nice run in the playoffs. But in the regular season, they were really just an average team. This year, they're not an average team. They are better than last year on defense. They are better than last year on offense, even with Jamar Chase missing a few games. Like, this is the team that the Bengals have been trying to build. Last year, they sort of stumbled their way to the Super Bowl, not having really built the full team, not having fully matured yet. This is like the fully matured Bengals this year.
Yeah, I remember saying at the end of last year as we watched them complete this with essentially no offensive line that this is probably as bad as the Bengals were going to be on the field for a while, even if the record didn't reflect it once they went out and spent that money to improve the glaring weakness on that roster. And we've seen kind of the ripple effect all across the board for them. The Kansas City Chiefs are another really interesting team to me because they've maintained their status as one of the league's elite offenses after going through a major change with the departure of Tyreek Hill and how they've operated in that offense. I've seen that, there's been a huge uptick in their use of multiple tight end sets this season. And so how do we gauge this Kansas City team versus what they've been under Patrick Mahomes since he took over as the starter?
Well, I mean, they're the number one offense in the league again. By our numbers, by any advanced metric, Kansas City has the number one offense. In fact, other advanced metrics actually have Kansas City's offense even higher than we do. But the difference has to do with like third downs earlier in the season. And since like week 7, we have them about the same place as other metrics, whatever. Best offense in the league. The defense has not been good. I mean, we have the defense 23rd in the league, which is not terrible, but it's not good. But the offense is so good that it makes them overall an excellent team. And, offense, we talk about this a lot with analytics. Offense is more predictable than defense. You'd rather depend on offense than, yes, teams can go on defensive runs in the playoffs, but for the most part, offense is more predictable. And we know Kansas City has the best offense in the league.
Offense wins championships. I can hear people shuddering in their cars right now.
Yeah, it's more trustworthy. Sometimes defense does win championships, but you can trust offense more.
Listen, as a former offensive player, you're not going to get any argument from me on that one. Aaron, on the other side with the NFC, I noticed one name conspicuously absent from the grouping there, despite where they sit in the playoff rankings right now. Last year, we had an historically bad 1 seed in the AFC with the Tennessee Titans. How historically poor are we talking about for the Minnesota Vikings as a playoff team this year?
This Vikings year is absolutely bonkers. And I will fully admit we have them a little bit lower than other advanced metrics. And I think a big reason for that is that we only incorporate some penalties in DVOA, and Minnesota has a very big penalty differential this year where their opponents have a lot of penalties and they have very few penalties. But overall, we have Minnesota, despite the 12-4 record, 28th in the league. And even if you think we're a little wrong about them, so yeah, give them a few spots, then there'd be like 23rd in the league. Like they are not just like the worst 12-4 team ever. They are actually on the list of the lowest DVOA ever for a playoff team, going all the way back to 1981. Unless they clobber Chicago this week, which they might because Chicago just announced that Nathan Peterman is going to be their starting quarterback. But unless they clobber Chicago, they will be one of the 10 lowest rated playoff teams we've ever measured. It's really crazy.
And with this team, a lot of people, when they look at the Vikings and their failings, it's usually just a Kirk Cousins conversation, whether that's the primetime narrative or whether that's him relative to what his paycheck has been here. But this just seems to be a Vikings team that has no earthly interest in playing defense this year, correct?
Here's the thing about the Vikings. There's no way in which they stand out as being really bad. There's nothing about this team that's really, really bad. Basically, if you look at the stats, not the results, not the wins and losses, everything about this team is just below average, except they have the best wide receiver in the game. But everything else, run defense, pass defense, special teams, the running game, passing to any other receivers, right? Cousins' performance overall. None of it is like the worst in the league, but it's all bad.
God, a ringing endorsement for Minnesota walking into this postseason here.
I'm sorry. They still have a chance. That's what's wild. I'm going to get cooked if they actually win the Super Bowl. But there's never been a team to this extent. But the 2003 Carolina Panthers were sort of similar, just not to the same extent. And that team came within 2 minutes of winning the Super Bowl. So anything is possible.
So let's stick in the NFC then, because one team that you guys are very high on here, but that I think fans, the general public, always have questions about are the Dallas Cowboys. And we've seen for them this year so much run defense has come up time and time again. How much should that worry people? How much does that worry you when you look at this team heading into the postseason, especially in this year's NFC?
I don't think their run defense is particularly bad. It's just been worse in recent weeks. We actually have it 5th for the whole season, but it's been worse in recent weeks. Their offense is the problem, actually. Their defense is really good. Their defense is really good against the pass and really good against the run. We have them number 2 right now in defense. Their offense, we have 14th. And yeah, that includes a couple of Cooper Rush weeks. But even if you only look at the Dak Prescott weeks, they're like 10th or 11th. That's still above average. But if you said, what's the weakness of the Dallas Cowboys, I would not say the run defense as much as I would say the passing game. In particular, I feel like, finding someone other than CeeDee Lamb. I mean, Schultz is good and Gallup is good and Noah Brown has made some plays. But it's between finding the other receivers and the just mistakes that Prescott has made. He has thrown a lot of interceptions, and that is a problem.
So, how worried should that team be then about a potential trip to Tampa if current seeding holds? Is this Buccaneers team that gave us one little hit of the good stuff with this passing attack from last week against the Panthers now all of a sudden somebody that could have the Cowboys on upset alert?
Well, if you're worried about the Cowboys' run defense, do not be worried about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are close to the worst running game in the league this year. The offensive line injuries that they've had have really just taken their running game out at the knees. So, you're worried about going to Tampa because it's a road game and because it's Brady. But if you're, Dallas, you would much rather play Tampa than San Francisco. Minnesota is a complicated discussion, but Dallas is the better team, and Dallas should be favored. I would think Dallas will be favored to win in Tampa Bay.
You mentioned San Francisco. That team and that defense has been an unholy wrecking ball. They are a terror for anyone that has to face them. And offensively, they've managed to absorb quarterback injury all year long really well. As you guys look at this team under Brock Purdy, still more than capable of winning a Super Bowl? That's not an issue with Mr. Irrelevant at quarterback?
We have 2 different kinds of DVOA. We have the full season rating, and then we have a rating we call weighted, which gives less weight to games early in the season. In the weighted rating, San Francisco is the best team in the league right now. Even with Purdy on offense for a few games. Their offense has been that successful even without Samuel. Their defense has been that good overall. If you take out, in particular, that week 1 game in a monsoon against the Chicago Bears, they've been the best team in the league. So they are absolutely in this. Despite the fact that Purdy's the quarterback. It'll be a wild story if they win this thing with Purdy at quarterback. But it is... it feels a little bit like Brady in 2001, right? Brady was a second-year player, not first, and 6th round, not 7th. But, that team in 2001 won with defense and special teams, and Brady was surprisingly mistake-free. for a young kid, right? He wasn't Brady yet in 2001, right? If the San Francisco 49ers win it all this year, it'll be a very similar scenario for them, except they will have dominated the regular season much more than the 2001 Patriots did.
Man, this is a real glitch in the matrix situation right here, especially since it involves the San Francisco team that's obviously also had a special place in the Tom Brady narrative. So very, very
There's still some people who think Brady may go there next year. Right? There's still some talk that he might be the quarterback at San Francisco next year, that they may decide Purdy's not the guy, Lance is not the guy. Like, let's go get someone who's a known quantity, and he would come home to his hometown team. There is some discussion of that.
The 45-year-old free agent here in more ways than one. What an interesting year for Tom Brady. Aaron, one of my favorite things and one of our favorite things as like a general media full of gasbaggers is the team nobody wants to see in the postseason, late charging team that got there. Is there a team for you that kind of falls into that category? I look at, the Chargers because they've got Herbert and a defense and a team in general that's getting a little healthier in some key areas down the stretch. Jacksonville working their way into the postseason, potentially with that win-and-in scenario versus Tennessee this weekend. Do you have a different team in mind, or do one of those fall into that category?
I mean, the first team that came to mind to me was the Green Bay Packers, but for a similar reason, because they have a quarterback. The difference being their quarterback is not as good, has not been as good this year as Herbert and Lawrence, but has the track record to, be worried about him. And you don't want to be on the other side when Green Bay beats you and Aaron Rodgers gets smug. That being said, they're probably playing San Francisco in the first round. And we know the Packers have the history of San Francisco running all over them. Like, San Francisco is absolutely the team Green Bay does not want to play in the first round. And that's probably who they're going to play.
So I guess that brings it to the key element here then is, well, one, can we trust either of the old guys? It sounds like, based on our conversation between Brady and Rodgers, that while we've gotten some versions, some flashes of the guys that have been dominant in this league for so long, that matchup-wise are just where these teams are this season, trusting either of these guys for a long postseason run, probably not in the cards?
I trust Brady a little bit more than Rodgers based on their performance during the year. But the Tampa offense has been declining a little bit, whereas the Green Bay offense has been getting a little bit better, like healthier at offensive line, for example, healthier at receiver. So I think going forward, I trust the Green Bay offense a little bit more than the Tampa Bay offense. But, I mean, they could both do something, but they're just not. They just haven't been as good this year as the young guns. And their defenses, Tampa Bay's defense is better than Green Bay's defense, but like, their defenses haven't been as good as the defenses of the other NFC contenders. Like, that's the biggest difference to me, is actually San Francisco, Dallas, and Philly on defense are much better than Green Bay and Tampa.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think for Green Bay, a lot of people are going to coast off that high from last week, ignoring what you just mentioned, that this is a Minnesota offense that outside of one part is largely average to below average. And so going out there and strapping them up shouldn't necessarily inspire as much confidence as I feel like it is, but that feels more like a Aaron Rodgers lives here thing. And we knew the Packers were supposed to be talented before the season than actual market improvement from them on that side of the ball.
I think if Green Bay fans want to be excited about last week, be excited about the fact that you figured out a way to scheme to shut Justin Jefferson down. We have a film room column on it up right now at Football Outsiders by Derek Klassen. Like, they used brackets and they used cloud coverage and they redirected him at the line. And basically Jefferson had his worst game in a couple of years. And so that should give you confidence that, maybe our defensive coordinator is better than we thought he was when it comes to figuring out how to design a defense to stop our opponent.
Yeah, Packer Sports Talk radio hosts are probably have a bunch of callers that would disagree on that front, but you're right.
I have a feeling
they would. Last one up top, and then we'll ask the wild card questions here. The Eagles, with a less than 100% Jalen Hurts coming into this postseason, how concerning is that, despite the fact that we've sang the praises all year of the roster that Howie and company have built up around that armored car on both sides of the ball?
Yeah, I mean, I love the Eagles. Remember, they were my NFC Super Bowl pick before the season. But I just don't know how less than 100% Hurts is. That's the tough part about trying to predict what's going on with the Eagles. Like, they really need the bye week to get Hurts healthier, to get Lane Johnson healthier. Like it would be bad for them if they blew this bye week. They need the bye week.
Yeah, in the worst way, which ironically could mean getting less than 100% Jalen Hurts onto the field to secure that, since we saw the Minshew Mania magic may have run out a little bit here quicker than expected from those of us that enjoyed the mustached menace. But Aaron, let's look at this weekend. The big conversation is going to be about the wild card on both sides. So let's start with the NFC. That Green Bay and Detroit game flexed to Sunday night. So a lot of that interesting because the Seattle result earlier in the day affects what the Lions' chances are here. As you guys look at and stack up this last NFC wildcard spot, who do you think ultimately ends up finding their way in?
I mean, in our simulations, we have Green Bay making it a little over half the time, right? Because you figure their game against Detroit is pretty 50-50. Detroit's been the slightly better team in recent weeks, but I think the game is in Green Bay, I believe, right?
Yep.
So it's kind of 50-50. If they lose, I mean, Seattle should beat the Rams, are likely to beat the Rams. There is this feeling that the Rams sort of have Seattle's number because the Rams beat Seattle twice last year. And then earlier this year, I think Seattle only won with a last-minute touchdown against a bad Rams team that they should have beaten by more than that. So there's this feeling, maybe the Rams do upset the Seahawks, but it's most likely going to be either the Packers or the Seahawks.
Then on the other side here, the AFC, we've got Dolphins, Pats, and on the strength of Mike Tomlin magic, the Pittsburgh Steelers still potentially alive in this. Who ends up making it out of this hellscape?
Well, here's where I think we have the emotional complication that we do have to address, which is we have no idea whether Buffalo will go into this game completely mentally unprepared to play, or possibly very inspired to play for their teammate, or something sort of normal in between. If it's normal in between, or the Bills are super inspired, the fact is, not only are the Bills a much better team than the Patriots, it's a particularly bad matchup for the Patriots, right? We talk about certain matchups that just aren't very good for certain teams, right? Like we just did with the Rams and Seahawks.
Yeah.
The Bills are a terrible matchup for the Patriots. It is really hard to see the Patriots beating the Bills unless the Bills are just completely emotionally distracted. So if the Patriots make it in, they probably make it in on the bank shot where Cleveland upsets Pittsburgh, the Jets upset Miami, Jacksonville wins the AFC South, and then the Patriots get in at 8-9, which is possible. It is possible. I do think you worry about teams that have nothing left to play for, but there is a surprisingly strong record of teams that can keep another team out of the playoffs, don't lay down in the final week. The best example I always will give of this is 2004, when all the Bills had to do was beat the Pittsburgh backups to make the playoffs. And the Pittsburgh backups played hard enough to beat the Bills and keep them out of the playoffs. So if that is possible, then it's certainly possible for the Cleveland starters or the Jets starters to play good enough to win these games. So while the Dolphins are the most likely team to win the 7th seed, it really is we have it at 40% Miami, 32% the Patriots, 23% Pittsburgh, and 5% Jacksonville. It could go any way. It probably will not go to Jacksonville because Jacksonville is probably going to just win the AFC South.
Yeah, that would be the expectation going into this weekend here. Josh Dobbs, again, getting the start for Tennessee and a team that struggled mightily. So it makes sense. But like you said, there's a lot of very exciting things to pay attention to this weekend. We're always in contract bonus season as well. So plenty of interesting stuff to keep an eye out on here. Guys, footballoutsiders.com. Check it out. All this great information. Aaron Schtaz and the crew over there making you smarter as we head into the postseason stretch here. Aaron, we appreciate your time, man. We're excited to see you out in Arizona for the Super Bowl and catch up a little more there.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Looking forward to a good playoffs. And see you in Phoenix.